Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is the companion piece for last Sunday's how to use the British Infantry, and I wanted to look at strategies that we could use for beating the British Infantry. Obviously using them is very useful if you're a British player, but for everyone I thought we'd have a look at how to beat them. I'm going to talk mainly about their historical opponents, so how to beat them using the French, but I'm going to try and touch on some of the other nations as well. That's a request that some of you guys have had. You know, maybe looking at the non-historical opponents, but you'll end up playing them because you're at the club or, you know, amongst your mates. You know, you don't want to just necessarily be restricted to a historical French versus British mashup. So the first thing to do is look at what makes the British infantry so strong. And we boiled it down to first fire and steady line. So the first fire gave them an extra dice when they first fire, as the name suggests, and steady line allows them to fire and countercharge. So if we go with the first fire one of the key things to do with the French is always make sure that your skirmishers are deployed. Now, when we play, we just naturally assume that they are, but, you know, it's better, I guess, if you've got skirmish figures out in front of the unit. You can either buy them separately from Warlord Perrys or any other manufacturer, or the Perrys actually put them in the box, which is quite nice of them as well. So, by having your skirmishers deployed, you are -1 to be hit, and that really does help lessen the damage from that first volley of the British. Now, one thing that I didn't mention in the video on Sunday is that the fourth dice, the extra dice, really, if you're a British player, you shouldn't necessarily be looking at it to make a fourth kill. You should be looking at it to have another chance of a disorder. So you need to expect your French columns. Remember what I said about how to use French infantry? Always have your boys in column. It's going to make the French columns likely to be disordered. And for that reason, I suggest that you use one of two troop types. You either use cannon fodder, that you don't mind hanging around in the open ready to get shot again, or you use elite troops, so grenadiers or even old guard, who have got the elite special rule. They can recover from that disorder and then push home the attack. So just be aware that fourth dice is not necessarily about them causing an extra casualty. It can be just about them disordering you. If you've got some troops in your army that aren't as good as the rest, for argument's sake, Napoleons would be a good example of that, or maybe troops that aren't very good close to the enemy, so something like Bavarians, because they lack initiative. I believe Westphalians have that special rule as well. Then you can use those guys, get them up, get rid of that first fire, get them to take the hits, and then you bring up your better troops behind. They're unmolested and that extra dice has already been used. If you've seen my video on the most surviviest units, then you'll know that the Austrians, they get that extra dice when they first fire at close range. That's a lot scarier than the British because there's not really much you can do about that. It has to be the charging units and they have to take that. When we're mitigating the British firepower, another really good thing to do, and let's be honest, this is my tactic number one, use cavalry. Get the cavalry to force the British into square, because then they're only getting one shot at you. With that first fire, that doubles up to 2. Weirdly, if they can hold that first fire, they actually double their effectiveness when they're in square. But, you know, it's just one of those anomalies of the rule. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But that only gets them firing 1 dice at you, so you can engage them a lot easier. And that's the key with the British. Try and get them in close combat. And if they're in square, that's going to be slightly better because they can't countercharge. They can't use steady line if they are not in line, as the name suggests. So by having them in square, it means that you can charge them. You'll be hitting them on 3s with all your attacks. They'll be hitting you back on 4s with only maybe 2, possibly 3, but probably only 2 attacks. So force them into square. Declare that charge with your light cavalry. You should outnumber the British cavalry, although be advised the British cavalry is better than yours. So you may want to have some light cavalry perhaps to force the enemy into square, while your dragoons and your heavies, your cuirassiers, while they face off against the British. But you've got the enemy into square, you declare the charge, that's all good stuff. And as I say, that stops them having the steady line, which segues us nicely into ways of mitigating their steady line special. Now, the first one, obviously, is to disorder them before you charge. Now, I can't actually think of how that is possible in black powder. I guess the only thing... Well, no, actually, no, that still works as well. Because you have to charge before you do any firing. So it means that their disorder marker comes off at the end of their turn. Then you charge them, they're not disordered. I was thinking maybe if they win the combat in their turn, but they were disordered in that combat, but it still come off at the end of their turn. So if you can find a way of making them disordered before you charge, then absolutely go for that. Something that was suggested to me on the video by, and I'm just trying to find the name of the chap who did it, by Mareki, so this is a great tip, thank you for this, is, well, I'll read him verbatim. He says, my answer to steady line and countercharge is to charge first by a French column from long distance. So British taking long countercharge with no support. Then give my column supports from rear and ranks to continue brigade orders. So +3 to combat results. So what I think he means by that is you declare the charge from your maximum range and you meet in the middle. So you pull the British out of the line. You pull them forward 6 inches. Now, because you've ordered your charge with your whole brigade, you can move your troops up. Obviously, you can only contact with one of them, but you've moved your troops up, and your column, you have dictated that fight. So you can decide that you've got supports on either side and at the rear, giving you maximum static res. We're going to talk about static res in a second, but I'm also going to do a whole separate video on that. So it gives you the maximum +3 to your combat results. The British, having been pulled away from their supports, they've had to rush forward 5-6 inches. They're no longer in that 3-inch support range, so they don't have any pluses. Now, the British are hitting you on 3s, that's great. You're hitting them on 3s. You've got a slightly better morale than them because you're in column, because you've listened to my How to Fight French Infantry video. So you should win that combat. Alright, you might lose, it's a dice game at the end of the day, so they may inflict 1 or 2 more casualties than you. But because you've got that +3, then they need to beat you by 4 in order to win that combat. And that's very, very unlikely. 3 is obviously a draw. So it's a great tactic from Mareki there. Really good. Pull the infantry out of the line. You can then do that with the unit next to them in the next turn. Bring them forward as well. And so on until the line isn't looking like a line anymore, but it's a lot more staggered, a lot more ragged, and that's when you can start getting those flank charges in. And that's another key one. Remember, you do not get charge reactions against a flank charge. So if you can charge that that line in the flank, as I did in the battle report against General Dad, where we used the starter armies, if you can get them in the flank, they cannot countercharge. So they do not get that bonuses, and obviously they get all the negatives for being charged in the flank as well. So I'm very quickly going to touch on the other nations. If you're playing Austrians, use your larger units to win the firefight against the British. The British don't want to close with you because then they're going to take that 5 dice closing fire that's hitting on 3s. They're in line, they've only got a 4-up save, so they're not going to enjoy that very much. They get 4 dice with their first shot. You get 4 dice all the time because you have a large regiment. So you can afford to win that firefight. Even if they take an extra casualty with their extra first fire dice, again, you've got stamina 4 being a large unit. So you can take that fire. So with the Austrians, I would suggest stand off and just blaze away. I think they're one of the better armies, one of the only armies really, that can stand up to the British firing, and that's just because through their sheer weight of numbers. Again, with the Austrians, you should have a huge, overwhelming number of cavalry that should be able to defeat the British there. At least get them on parity, and then you can start making their units form square and all that good stuff. For the Russians, every ball's a fool, every bayonet's a hero. You've got to get in there, you've got to start fighting them in hand-to-hand combat. You've also got stamina 4, but you get -1 to your shooting. Combine that with the fact that you get to reroll a miss with Tough Fighter, and you want to be engaging those British in close combat. Again, it can be tough. This is where you want to make sure that you're getting those unit supports, that you've got troops either side of you and behind you. You're getting the full +3. You can use Cossacks to start challenging the flanks of the enemy, trying to get them in square. Remember, Cossacks can't declare a charge against the front of an unshaken enemy unit. So by the time they're shaken, it's probably already all over anyway. Also, don't forget with the Russians as well, you've got all that artillery. And same with the French. Do not waste that. You need to get your artillery, fire at one part of the line, break that, and then you can pour through and start mopping up from either side. But that's it. I wanted to keep this video under 10 minutes. Thank you very much. British Infantry are very, very strong, but they are not undefeatable. We're going to look in the future at how to use British allies and how to counter those. I'm going to look at that more from a how to incorporate them into your British Army perspective. And I'm also going to do a video on the importance of static res. That'll probably be a Wednesday night one. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.